In order to get better at chess, you will need to learn notation, which is often referred to as the language of chess. Every square on the chessboard has a name, which is actually just its coordinates. As we mentioned before, each column is called a file, and each row is called a rank. Every file in chess is given a letter, starting with the letter A on the left side of the board and going all the way to the letter H on the right. Every rank is given a number, starting with 1 on the white side of the board and going up to the number 8 on the black side of the board. Each square is named by its coordinate pair. Let's meet some of the squares. This square in the lower left-hand corner is known as A1. Notice we identify it with the letter first and the number second. Let's take a look and see where the E file meets with the fourth rank. Notice the arrows point at E4, so this square is known as E4. Let's draw a diagonal starting from A1 and go all the way up the board. Notice we land on the H8 square, and in between these squares we see B2, C3, D4, E5, F6, and G7. Together, this is known as the A1 to H8 diagonal, because the diagonal begins on A1 and ends on H8. Now that you've learned how to label each square on the chessboard, it's time to learn the notation of actual chess moves. Each piece has its own letter for chess notation. In this example, the king's letter is a capital K. With white to move, let's say the king is going to move to the E2 square. The way we describe that move is by saying the piece's letter first, which is capital K, then the square it moves to, E2. Remember, a piece always begins with a capital letter, and the square is always lowercase. So after the move, King E2, putting it all together, we say K, E2. Let's say black wants to play King to D7. In this case, it's the same idea. Capital K, lowercase D7. So piece, then square. K, D7. We will use the same idea for all the other pieces. The rook is a capital R, the queen a capital Q, the bishop a capital B. The knight, however, is a little bit different. Since the capital K is already used for the king, we use a capital N for the knight. For example, N E6. Finally, you may think that pawns are a capital P. In this case, pawns are only written as the square that they move to. For example, after the move E4, the notation is simply the square the pawn moved to, E4. Now that you've learned the language of chess, it's your turn to practice using chess notation. You've already learned how to move the pieces, and we've mentioned the idea of capturing. Let's talk more about capturing. In chess, when you capture a piece, you simply move your own piece to the same square as your opponent's piece and replace their piece with your own. The captured piece is then removed from the board. You don't stop before the captured piece, you replace it entirely. Let's watch this queen capture a pawn. Now let's watch this knight jump over one of its own pieces to capture the queen. Capturing pieces is a critical part of the game. However, you do not have to capture a piece if you don't want to. That being said, if you can capture more of your opponent's pieces than they capture of yours, it's going to be much easier to win. One question about capturing that we haven't answered is, how do you notate a capture? Let's say in this position that you plan on taking the black queen with your queen on b3. A good idea. You would write the piece that will capture it, in this case, the queen, so we use a capital Q. You then write an X, which means captures. And then you write the square where the piece gets captured. So after queen takes e6, we would write Q, X, e6. Here is one more capturing question. How do we notate a pawn capturing a rook and promoting to a queen at the same time? Does it sound complicated? Don't worry, it's just one extra step. We start by notating the capture. Remember, we mark a pawn with the file that it is currently on. In this case, the pawn is on the B file. So we would write a lowercase b, then we would write captures, which is an X, so lowercase b, X, and then the square that we capture, A8, so BX A8. So far, we have BX A8. Since we are promoting to a queen, you simply add to the end of your move an equal sign and then write which piece you are promoting the pawn into, which is usually the queen. So putting it all together, we would write B takes A8 equals queen. Now it's your turn to practice capturing pieces. Check is the word that is used when one piece is threatening to capture the other side's king. Check basically means look out, king in danger. Let's take a look at some examples of playing check. In this position, can you see how white can threaten to capture the black king? That's right. Bishop to f6 check. White's bishop puts the black king in danger of capture, so black must deal with this check. In the next lesson, we will learn the 3 ways to get out of check. In this position, black's rook can put white's king into danger. After rook d1, the white king is in check, and white must respond to this attack. Finally, in this position, black's pawn is ready to capture the white knight. Remember, pawns capture one square away diagonally. Can you see how white can escape the pawn's attack and place the black king into check? If you found knight to g6, great job. The knight escapes danger and now puts the black king into check. One final question is, how do we notate a check? It is pretty easy. All you do is add a plus to the end of your typical move notation. This means after writing ng6, you add a plus at the end. So it'll look like this, ng6 plus, meaning that black is in check. Now it's your turn to practice playing check. As we learned in the last lesson, when the king is in check, it must get out of check. You cannot ignore check and play another move you want to play while leaving your king in check. You have to stop the check. Luckily, you have 3 easy ways to get out of check. The simplest way to get out of check is to move your king to a square where it is no longer in check, like this. Another way to get out of check is to block the check with one of your other pieces. Oftentimes, the best way to get out of check is by capturing the checking piece. Now let's see you escape check. If a king is in check, and it cannot escape check by moving, blocking, or capturing, then the king is said to be in checkmate. That means you win. Or maybe your opponent won. Again, checkmate is the entire goal of chess. It doesn't matter who has captured the most pieces, or how long it has taken, or anything else. If the king is in checkmate, it's game over. Once the king is in checkmate, you don't have to take the king off the board. It's time to shake hands and say, good game. Now it's your turn to checkmate. Chess can often be a long game with more than 100 moves played, but it can also be incredibly short if you want it to be. Many people want to know, what are the fastest checkmates? And we are going to show you, but keep in mind, none of these checkmates can be forced. These are only checkmates that you literally have to try to do on purpose because they can be otherwise defended very easily. Let's see the shortest possible checkmate on the board. White plays f3, not a great opening move, already exposing the king on the e1 to h4 diagonal. Black opens with e5. Notice the black queen is already looking at the weakened h4 square, ready to pay the white king a visit. White plays g4, further weakening the e1 to h4 diagonal, and the black queen pounces on the h4 square, delivering the fastest checkmate in chess. Notice that the white king cannot move, there's no way to block the check, and you can't capture the checking piece, so after 2 moves, the game is already over. In fact, it's time to start a new game. Let's see that idea again, but this time it will be white delivering the checkmate. After e4, black plays f6, d4, g5. Can you spot the checkmate? That's right, queen h5. The fastest checkmate for white is in 3 moves, and the fastest checkmate for black is in just 2 moves. Let's hope you never find yourself on the wrong side of this checkmate. Now it's your turn to practice the fastest checkmates. There is another kind of mate on the board called stalemate. Stalemate is what happens when your king is not in check, but you also have no other legal move on the board. And when this happens, it's a draw and nobody wins. You might be absolutely winning your game and about to checkmate the opponent's king, but if you fall into stalemate, it's a draw. This is best explained with some examples. In this position with white to move, the game would be a stalemate, because white's only piece, the king, does not have any legal squares to move to, and white is not in check. In this position, let's say white plays queen to c2. The queen gets 1 square closer to the king, but notice black's king is not in check and black does not have a legal move in this position. The position is a stalemate. Remember, in chess, you're never forced to make an illegal move, so black cannot put the king onto a square where it would be captured. In this position, can you find a better move for white? White can actually win the game in just 1 move after queen b2 checkmate. Remember, your opponent can never be in stalemate if they are in check. In this position, black looks doomed. The king is trapped in the corner. White is ready to deliver checkmate on the next move, and black is down lots of material. However, chess is a game of many opportunities, and even when things look really bad, you might have the chance to save the game, or at least draw. Notice that since black's king does not have any legal moves, if black's queen disappeared from the board, it would be a stalemate if it were black to move. In this position, can you find a way to make black's queen disappear and create a stalemate? If you found queen takes h2 check, great job. White must deal with the check, and the only way to get out of the check is to capture the black queen. Now the only remaining piece is the black king, and since black's king does not have any legal squares, and black is not in check, the game is a stalemate. What a save by black. Let's take a look at this position. If white played the move queen to c7, it's not a very wise move because white, first of all, could have won the game immediately with queen to b7 checkmate, but also queen to c7 traps black's king. But does that mean it's a stalemate? Not in this position, because notice black has another piece. Black could play the move h3, allowing white to correct the mistake from the last move and deliver checkmate with queen to b7. Notice if we added another pawn, just this pawn on h3, the position would now be a stalemate with black to move. Now that you've learned about stalemate, remember to stay alert and avoid it when you're winning, and when you're losing, keep your eyes open for the opportunity to save the game with stalemate. Stalemate is just one of the possible ways to end the game in a tie. Another way is to simply agree to a draw. This might happen if neither player can see a way to victory. One person offers the draw, and the other can accept or decline. Another way to get a draw is if the exact same position is repeated 3 times. After 3 repetitions, either player can claim a draw when it is their turn to move. Or, if you're playing online, a draw will automatically be called after 5 repetitions. Another way to draw is if neither player has enough pieces to checkmate, like lone king versus lone king. You'll learn more about this later. Finally, you can also draw if 50 pairs of moves have been played on the board without any captures or pawn moves. This keeps you from dying of boredom as you and your opponent move your rooks back and forth forever. Now it's your turn to practice drawn positions. One of the most unusual rules of chess is called castling. This move was invented to speed up the game and do 2 things at once. When you castle, your king moves toward the safety of the corner and your rook comes toward the action in the middle. You literally are moving 2 pieces at once, but it counts as just 1 move. You can castle in either direction, left or right. In either case, your king moves over only 2 squares, and then the rook from that side is moved directly to the other side of the king. Like this. And here's another example of castling. Let's say you're playing a game right here on chess.com. Here are 2 ways you can make the castling move. The first option is to drag the king to the square where it will castle, and then the rook will automatically move, like this. Another option is to click the square the king is currently on, in this case e8, and then the square where you will move the king, g8. So we click e8, followed by g8, and now we're castled. Castling is a great move with many benefits if it is used at the right time. However, there are a few conditions that may prevent you from castling. First off, you cannot castle when you are in check. You must first deal with the check before trying to castle. Secondly, you cannot castle if your king would castle through a check, or after castling, your king would land into a check. Next, you cannot castle if there are any pieces in between your king and your rook. It must be completely empty. In this position, both white and black have to move one piece before they're able to castle. After knight f3 and bishop c5, for example, both sides are now able to castle kingside. Finally, you cannot castle if your king has made any other move before, or if the rook you are castling with has already moved. It must be the first move for both pieces. In this position, the only legal castling move is for black. Since white's king has already moved, white cannot castle. Notice black can only castle with the rook on h8 because the other rook has already moved. What is the notation for castling? It depends on if you castle kingside or queenside. In this position, let's say white castles kingside. The way you would write it is 0-0. If black now castles queenside, we would add one more 0, so it would be 0-0-0. One way that can help you remember this is notice on the king side there are two squares between the white king and the rook. Notice 0-0 has two zeros, so kingside castling, two squares, two zeros. Notice on the queen side, there's three squares between the king and the rook. Queenside castling has three zeros, 0-0-0. Now that you've learned this powerful move, it's time to practice castling. The last weird rule in chess is called en passant, which is French for in passing. This rule was introduced at the same time pawns were allowed to move two squares on their first move. When that happened, sometimes pawns would move past other pawns without giving the other pawn an opportunity to capture, which didn't seem fair. So en passant was invented. Pay attention, it's tricky. If your opponent's pawn moves forward two squares, which it can only do if it is that pawn's first move, and it lands directly next to one of your pawns, then on your next turn, and that turn only, you have the opportunity to capture that pawn as if it had only moved one square, like this. Let's take a look at that again. If a pawn is moved forward two squares and lands next to another pawn, that pawn can capture the first pawn on its very next move. You move behind the pawn as if it had moved only one square and capture it, placing it off the board. You might get some weird looks if you do this move in a game with someone who doesn't know, but it's an important rule of chess. Now that you've learned en passant, let's have you try it. Now that you've learned how to move, to capture, to check, and checkmate, as well as do the special moves in chess like castling and en passant, it's time for you to feel what it's like in a real game. In a real game, nobody is there to tell you what to move. You have to think and decide, what is the right move? Should I move a piece? Or can I capture something? Should I castle? Or try to promote one of my pawns? This is where the thinking part of chess comes in, and you have to try and decide what your best move is. The only way to do this is by looking at the board and considering both your options and your opponent's possible plans, and then trying to decide which move improves your position the most. Sometimes the right move will jump right out at you. Rook h8, checkmate. At other times, you'll have absolutely no idea what the best move is. Let's see if you can find a good move in each of the following positions. Black is currently up 3 pawns, so Black decides to offer a trade of queens, thinking it will be easier to win the game without having to deal with White's queen. Black didn't consider what the queen was doing on the 8th rank. Can you find White's best move? The Black queen gave up protection of the back rank and forgot to ask what checks White has in the position. White only has 1 check, but it's checkmate. If you found Queen e8 checkmate, great job. This checkmate is known as a back rank checkmate. In this position, after Rook a1 check, it looks like Black is about to deliver a back rank checkmate. What is White to do? Well, if White decides to block with Rook e1, notice that doesn't help because after Rook takes e1, it's checkmate. Let's look a little closer. Can you find another White piece that can help us deal with the check? If you found the move Bishop takes a1, great job. The bishop moves all the way from the other side of the board to come to the rescue, capturing the checking piece. Remember, if you can capture a checking piece, this can often be the best way to get out of check. In this position, what do you think is White's best move? If you're thinking Rook a8 delivering a back rank checkmate, you have to remember, it's not just your moves you have to consider, we also have to figure out what is our opponent doing. In this position, White's best move is also White's only move, because notice, White is in check. And in this position, White must deal with the check first and play King h1. Now Black has to be careful and deal with White's threat on the next turn. In this position, can you find White's best move? Notice that we can capture a pawn with Rook takes e4, but then Black is able to do the same thing with Knight takes a7. Remember, when you find a good move, always look for a better move. Don't forget about your pawn on a7. It's 1 move away from reaching the 8th rank. Do you remember what happens when a pawn reaches the other side of the board? That's right, the pawn gets a promotion. Notice the newly promoted queen puts the Black king into check and threatens the knight all at the same time. After king f7, queen takes c6 wins the knight. It takes time and practice to find the best move. Now it's your turn to continue practicing finding the best move. You know the rules and how to play, but now it's time to see the ideas you have learned put into action in an actual game. In this game, we'll see how 2 pieces working together can be a powerful force, and that a king surrounded by pieces isn't always safe. Let's take a look. White begins the game with e4, controlling the center and opening up lines for the queen and light-squared bishop. Black plays c6, a move we haven't seen yet. The idea is to prepare the move d5 on the next turn and attack the strong pawn on e4. White plays d4, controlling more space in the center and also opening up the dark-squared bishop. Black strikes back in the center with d5, threatening to capture the pawn on e4 on the very next move. When the opponent threatens to take one of our pieces, it's natural to feel worried. Remember, it's okay to make even trades, such as a pawn for a pawn. What you don't want is to give away your pieces for nothing. In this situation, white could push the pawn forward with e5, white could capture the pawn on d5, or, as in the game, protect the pawn and develop a piece with knight to c3. After d takes e4, knight takes e4, white's knight recaptures the pawn and moves directly into the center. Black now plays knight to d7, developing a knight and also preparing the next move, knight g to f6, with the idea that if the knight gets captured, black is ready to recapture the knight, like that. The drawback to this move is the light-squared bishop is blocked, and also notice black's king has no moves. We'll take a look and see if that becomes a problem. White plays bishop to c4, activating the bishop to a powerful diagonal, and as you know, pointing at the weakest point in black's camp, f7. Black plays knight g to f6, attacking white's knight, and white plays knight to g5, avoiding the knight's attack and joining the light-squared bishop in attacking the f7 square. In this position, black should play e6, blocking the light-squared bishop's path to the f7 square, but black does not have a sense of danger in the position and plays h6, attacking the knight and assuming that it's going to move backwards. Can you find the move that immediately wins the game for white? That's right, bishop takes f7. White delivers checkmate, threatening to capture the king on the next turn, and notice black's king is surrounded, or should we say smothered, by its own pieces. It cannot escape the attack. You've learned a lot so far. Can you put your ideas into action? Let's prove it in the challenges.